Hi everyone, it's Henry here, and welcome to this video, which is the second part in my Flesheater Courts army painting series, and a video that probably wouldn't have got made if it wasn't for that first one. The reason this is a little bit late is because I was pretty under the weather last week, and typically when I felt like that, not feeling very creative, don't really want to sit down and paint, can't find it quite hard to concentrate, and normally I've just have gone off and done other jobs that I needed doing for the business. But because I had such a tight process that I had developed for painting this army, with that initial army launch box that we did, I was able to just come in, do 20 minutes, get one stage done, right, walk off, go and do other things. When I felt a bit more energetic, come back, do another set, move on. And it meant that I was able to get this centerpiece miniature that Games Workshop sent us, this Ushoran mortar model for this army. I was able to get him painted over the week without really having to think too much. And no, he's not the best job I can ever do. Absolutely not. But I think he looks really good for the time investment in him. And as I'm becoming more and more of a multi-system gamer, I'm discovering that I cannot spend forever painting, every single army that I want to if I want to play these games. And the Flesheater Courts have been a fantastic experiment for me to help me discover what my sort of speediest level is. I don't want to say lower level because that sounds negative, but my speediest army painting level is where I still enjoy the process and I enjoy the results that I get from it. And that's what I think I've achieved with this guy. So from a personal development point of view, I found it very, very exciting, and hopefully I can just share a bit of that with you in this video. We'll go through the various points of difference. I'll address some of the questions I got, so things like around the basing and whatnot from the last video as well. And I hope maybe you find some of my experiences useful for your own sort of army painting endeavors. So let's paint. Just a quick look at the kit itself. From a build point of view, very, very enjoyable. He absolutely flew together. Very, very few visible sort of join lines that needed filling and whatnot. So yeah, very, very pleasant experience in that sense, which some of the other stuff, the Flesheater Courts, I must admit, hasn't been. Now, from a sub-assembly point of view and how am I going to paint him point of view, this is a little bit tougher. He is pretty much separate from the base, which is fantastic. A lot of the times some of the Games Workshop kits will get them and the feet are like half a foot or something will be molded into the base and it'll make it quite tricky. That's not the case with this. You'll see, that's my dog just run in, sorry if you can hear that. You can see on the back of his cloak it's attached to a little bit of the wall, but it's pretty good. Other than that, it's the base and him are quite separate. From a point of view of holding him to paint, the reason that I'm wearing the black glove, I don't normally wear it in the videos, but this is because I'm going to be handling the model a lot. I couldn't figure out how to pin him onto a cork and stuff easily, so I'm just going to handle him, and the glove's going to hopefully prevent too much damage occurring with that. And also worth noting that if you make notes on how to paint something, follow them when you do it. Usually I prime black or whatever's closest, and that's what I did, and I was spraying away with my purple base colour. I was like, this doesn't look quite right. And of course that's because for the Flesheater Courts I started from a lighter base. So a quick respray and then we go again. So base coating him just like I've done the other ones with the Barak Nar Burgundy. This is thinned about 2 drops to 3 drops of thinner to every drop of paint. This is a normal Citadel base or layer, whatever it is, the Barak Nar Burgundy. And I'm spraying a 25 psi through a 0.4mm needle and nozzle airbrush, in this case our Harder and Steam Mech Evolution. So once I've got a nice smooth solid base coat of that Barak Nar Burgundy, we can go in and start doing the pre-shade using JN Grey. This project fought me a little bit as well. When I was priming him outside, I dropped him on the floor in the garden, so as I'm doing all of this work I keep finding little bits of twigs and dog hair and all the rest of it, which is, yeah, always fun. But quite a dramatic pre-shade, if you remember from the previous video, by which I mean more or less just highlighting it from directly above so that the surfaces facing upwards will be brightest and the surfaces facing away from that light source above are going to be very dark, or in this case the magenta colour. It's a deliberate stylistic choice and not something I typically do, but I felt really suited these miniatures. And Ushoran, I can't express how fantastic I think this sculpt is, both from how cool it looks but also just paintability. It's got very clearly sort of defined areas, and the posing, he's got so many cool angles, and then obviously you've got loads of interesting focal points. So if you wanted to spend tons of time working on this miniature, you absolutely could, but as you'll see in this video, you can also spend very little time on him and I think still make him look super cool. So once I've done all that normal sort of pre-shading from the top there, I've just gone in and there's tons of faces and skulls on his cloak. I've just got to make sure I've picked those out nice and bright so that the contrast paints and whatnot I use later will show up plenty. Then obviously the cloak's the next biggest element of this miniature. And because of the way Games Workshop tend to sculpt their cloth, it's often quite angular, or it's certainly got quite strong folds in it. I believe a lot of this is to do with how effectively you can then use things like washing and dry brushing and stuff to take advantage of those details. And in this case, airbrushing as well. So again, just quite a steep angle I'm spraying down onto the cloak from, highlighting those areas that are facing upwards towards the light and leaving those creases really, really nice and dark. Super quick thank you to all of you that support us over on Patreon. You're allowing myself and Andy to do this full time now, produce videos here, videos over on Patreon each week, and all the other things we're starting to do with the company. Things like the MPO, the model ranges, the paint range coming later this year. If it wasn't for your support, we wouldn't be able to do any of that. So thank you ever so much for that. For his skin, I'd really enjoyed on the character models that I've painted so far. I've gone much more yellow with their skin tone. I think it just helps them stand out a little more from the more green and blues that I've been doing the regular troops in. And for this mixture, it was Cassandra Yellow with a little drop of Targor Rage shade in there. It's not hugely different to the yellow mix I did before, which I think was maybe Celia Green shade instead of the Targor. Whatever it was, it's in the previous video. But it's still all staying in that triad that I was trying to, with the sort of the green yellows, the purples, and the odd bit of orange here and there was what I was trying to stick to with the miniatures. So that mix, about 5:1, and then for every drop of that mix, so if you made it up, I would then dilute it with about 1 drop of thinner, so roughly 50-50. A few coats and you end up with this lovely sickly sort of yellowy green skin. Now for this cloak, as I said, I wasn't really on it last week too much, so I just couldn't think too much. I was doing a lot of the stuff on the fly. I'm going to airbrush it because it's quick and it makes sense to do. Particularly on larger areas like cloth and stuff. The airbrush is a wonderful tool to use, and obviously we enjoy using them, which is why we're going to do it. But I just wanted to be aware of overspray, so I'm just using a little liquid mask here. So this is just liquid latex. I use the one by Humbrol, but lots of different brands make it. And I'm just going to go in and apply it over areas that are close to where the edges of the cape are, that I don't want to get the overspray. Once it's dry, you can see it sort of goes a bit sort of transparent. And you're sort of shiny almost. Once that was ready, I got on with spraying it. Now you can see on the bottom on the earth there, I'd done some tester colours, and in the end I decided on Carroburg Crimson to be my red. One layer of that was like, oh, this isn't going to work. This is too wishy-washy. So I added in a drop of a red contrast paint here. I think it was Blood Angels, might have been Flesh Terrors. No, I'm pretty sure it's Blood Angels actually. So just a little drop of the contrast for sort of 3, 4, 5 drops of the wash, something like that. So much more in favour of the wash rather than the contrast. And that's because the contrast paints are so powerful with their colour that a little goes an awfully long way. Sprayed it on. I was like, oh, it looks cool, but it just wasn't right in my eyes. That the red was too different to all the other colours that I had previously been using on the miniatures. It just did not tie in with the scheme. So I went back. I pre-highlighted it up again. In this case, I left the red because it's dark enough. It works in the shadows, not a problem. And because we're airbrushing here, with such thin layers of paint, we're not obscuring any detail here. We're not damaging any detail. So I just go in with the JN Grey again, heavily thinned, probably 4 or 5 drops of X28 thinner to paint. And then when that was dry, I went to a red that I knew was much more of that sort of magenta colour. And this is simply called Red by Vallejo Model Air. But as you can see, if I can stop dropping it, when you spray it on, it's pretty damn pink, which is perfect because that matched exactly what I was doing with the rest of the scheme. So it's stronger than that Barak Nar Burgundy that I've been using in the shadows. It's slightly lighter, but it's just the perfect colour for it. And for such a large area of the miniature that was covered, I had to get that colour right. But that's it. That's all I was going to do with the cloak, was a simple, pre-shade and then one colour over it, which is what we've done for the majority of the rest of the miniatures. Then when I was happy with that and it was dry, I just go and peel off some of the liquid mask. So you can use some blue tack or a little toothpick to get it started without damaging the paint. And then once you've got a bit that you can grab onto, as you see here, I'm just using some tweezers and slowly working it off the miniature. Very rewarding step this, if you like, sort of, you know, what do they call it? Peel porn, don't they? When you sort of peel off the tape when you've masked things and reveal what's underneath and stuff. It's good, good fun. It's a great little product, liquid latex. Very, very useful. And then I just wanted to add a little bit of sort of dirt and grime to the bottom of his cloak. You know, he's been dragging it around in all the muck that's around there. So I just used Garaghaks Earthshade straight into the brush, no thinner or anything. And just do a few coats of that on the hem of the cloak. I've blacked out the details, I've painted in all the other stuff on there in exactly the same colours and process that I've used for everything else in the army. One thing that cropped up that was new here was the fur on his cloak. That doesn't really come up on any of the other miniatures that I painted so far. And I wanted to make it a little bit different to the other stuff that I had done on there. So in this case, I picked a nice dark brown and just followed the process of that. Once it was dry, mixed in a little bit of pale blue to highlight it up. One highlight, done. Now, I'd avoided gluing him to the base for as long as possible, but I was thinking at this step I'm probably going to have to get him on here now because we need to blend in those bits of him that are attached to the base. We need to start blending all of that in to the rest of the scheme. So whilst the oils are drying, so he's got the oils on him now that we used in the previous video, part of the process, that's the step we're at. So whilst these oils were drying, I thought it's a good chance to work on the base. It's a great opportunity here for me to answer a question quite a few of you had about how I'd done the rocks and statues and bits that were on the basing on a few elements from that army launch box. So I'm just going to go through how I did it. Obviously, he was still drying with the oils, but I wanted to get on and do something, so I've done the rest of the bits of his base here. And as you can see, it's just a case of stippling on with a large brush, different greys, you know, darker greys, lighter greys. And to make those greys, I took Model Air Dark Sea Grey, and then I just used the different paints that I had on my palette, so things like Karak Stone from highlighting the skeleton stuff, the pale blue grey that I'd been mixing into the contrast to highlight all the other things, and then a bit of black here and there. And I just was doing it like that to try and create a little bit of variation in tone across that stonework. Once that's complete, I go in, pick out all the bones, which is tons. It's an amazing base, by the way. If you're looking to do like a diorama piece, you could do far worse than consider picking up this base to use for that. So once that was ready, I have then glued the model in place, used the texture paint to help blend in the little bits that were there, and then any stonework that was there I've done up in the same way. It's just that tiny little bit on the back, really. And then I've given the whole base a wash using the Starship Filth, which is what we used on the entire miniature before. So it's exactly the same grey wash we've used on the miniature. So again, it helps tie the miniature into the base. Now, I know I'm referring back a lot to the previous video I've done, but this really is a companion video for that. I don't just want to give you the exact same recipe again because it's pointless. One thing a lot of you had asked about was the moss that I'd done on the stones. It's just this. I got olive green oil paint, and whilst that other oil paint was wet, I just stippled a bit of it on and then used some mineral spirits to sort of smush it around the miniature and let it dry. And that's all it is. I think it's very, very effective. And again, this whole army is all about experimenting with time versus results, you know, effort versus results. I'm trying to get away with the least amount of work as I can, but it just means that everything I do, I need to execute well. And I feel that's what I'm achieving largely with this project, which is very rewarding. Now, obviously, one of the big things Ushoran's got on him, which nearly all the other miniatures don't in the range, is nice bits of metal. And fall back here, again with my army painting, I like to use, you know, a few old faithfuls for various things. So if I'm painting golds, I'll always tend to base coat them using Scale 75 Decayed Metal. Once that was dry, I'm using a contrast here, but I'm using it like a wash. So I've got it on my palette. I've thinned it down with loads of water, so it's not behaving as much like a contrast paint anymore. It's more like a wash. This is Dark Angel's Green. And this was just to give the gold some sort of tarnishing. I know gold doesn't weather and age up in perhaps the same way as we think of with other models, but there's always that concession of what looks cool too, right? And I felt that green wash not only would give the impression of age, but it would also, again, help keep tying it into those colours that we're using. We've got that orangey sort of metal base colour, and then we've got that green over the top. So we're always going back purple, green, orange, purple, green, orange. And once that was dry, I then used Gehenna's Gold, which is by Games Workshop, again, because it's a very orangey gold, and just did some incredibly sparing highlights with that, just to give it a little bit of shine. Just, those areas that it would get sort of buffed and rubbed, might still see a little bit of shine coming through it. And such a cool mini. I would be tempted to get another one and take more time painting them. Let's see. Let's see how much I enjoyed playing with the army. And then just to vary up the golds here and there, I chose to use here Valdor Gold, which is by Citadel. I didn't know about this paint. I was in my hobby shop the other day, Incom Gaming in Cheltenham, and saw this on the shelf. I was like, oh, I've seen that before. Picked up a pot. Just fancy giving it a go. And it's much more pale, much more boring, really, but just quite a nice little different bit of gold there. And then he's got these little gems, one on his forehead, some on his bracelet, and then some on his rings. Again, I didn't have the energy to do lots of cool painting for gems here, so I just did a simple grayscale with my brush, just again using what was on my palette, a black with some pale blue added in. And then I used Eldari Emerald, which is a contrast paint. I did a few little coats of that over the top of it, again, just to keep it in that green thing. I was thinking of doing it red like the box art, but I was like, well, red didn't work with the cloak, so let's stick to greens and stuff. And as it was, I think they've come out really lovely. So yeah, very, very happy with that. And there we go. That's the big lad for this army, all done. Hugely, hugely satisfied with that. I can't stress enough the impacts and progress I've had with my own personal army painting over this last week. And actually, none of it's to do with paint on a brush or anything like that. It's purely down to that having a process in place. And I've always taken notes. I've always I've got a little painting journal. I jot down little things that I discover. I jot down recipes. I do all of that. But I can't honestly say that I've put as much forethought into a scheme as I have with this Flesheater Courts one. And it's just paying dividends at the moment for me. In the past, this project would have been dead in the water. I have very, as I'm sure many people do, I have very, very sort of short windows where I'm able to get painting done, personal stuff. And if something doesn't get done in that window, usually something else comes along. And that means that this project just sort of dies and ends up. And I'm determined for that to happen as infrequently as possible going forwards. So yeah, I hope that the video also contained or answered a few of those questions that those of you had that have watched the first one. And again, I hope that you can see that I've always been generally of the opinion, and this is something I think we might discuss on the podcast soon, this idea of not necessarily having to paint your character models to a higher level than the rest of your army, for letting the sculpt do an awful lot of the work. And for me, I think this encapsulates that. There's this miniature, just the mass of him, the quality of him, and the handful of little additional elements to him, the cloak, the gold. They provide enough of a point of difference that he can stand out further without having to invest a significantly greater proportional amount of time on the miniature to just your basic, ghoul, lad or lass that was in it. So I hope you've enjoyed it. Thanks if you've watched all the way to now for putting up with it. I know I don't sound brilliant. I sound better than I did a few days ago, I can tell you that much. And hopefully in a few days' time, I will see you for another video where creativity's not gone up a notch and, all the rest of it is a little bit smoother sailing. So thanks ever so much for your support. If you've got any questions, pop them down in the comments. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Take care. I'll see you next time. If you've liked any of the models in this video and you fancy having an army of them yourself, but perhaps you don't have the time or wherewithal to get it done, consider dropping us an email at commissions@cultofpaint.com and maybe Ben can sort you out.